I'm very happy to see many of you also from the DA. As an alumni of the DA, it is always good to come back to my alma mater. And tomorrow is Press Freedom Day, and on this occasion, we meet here today and discuss how far we've come in these endeavors. The year 2023 also marks the 30th anniversary of World Press Freedom Day. 3 decades have passed since it was proclaimed in 1993, and in these times we have seen substantial progress towards achieving a free press and freedom of expression around the world. In other parts of the globe, developments are awakened and elections, wars, and conspiracies are caused by fake news. The ClubDA and Rotary Maria Theresia teamed up again, and we want to open the discussion about constructive but also negative developments around the globe. Therefore, we invited a great keynote speaker, Mr. Buschek, and great panelists to outline and discuss this very topic with us. I would also like to give the floor to Barbara Blaha from ClubDA to welcome us as well. The floor is yours.
It's my great pleasure to be here tonight to represent our club, the Alumni Association of the Diplomatic Academy. The club was founded in 1969 and is one of the oldest alumni associations in Austria. It has now over 1,800 members in more than 100 countries, 14 local chapters in Europe and the Americas. One of its main goals is the support of the ever-growing global network of the DA alumni, as well as to connect them with the current students, partners, faculty, and staff. Scholarships and mentoring are other priorities. In this context, the ClubDA has supported and facilitated the foundation of the Rotary Club Vienna Maria Theresia from 2018 and has concluded an agreement of cooperation with the Rotary Club in 2022. Tonight's event is part of this cooperation and we are very happy about it. Every year, the 3rd of May is a date which celebrates the fundamental principles of press freedom, to evaluate press freedom around the world, to defend the media from attacks on their independence, and to pay tribute to journalists who have lost their lives in exercise of their profession. This year's theme for the 30th anniversary of this day is Shaping a Future of Rights, Freedom of Expression as a Driver for All Other Human Rights. And Antonio Guterres, the United Nations Secretary General, said in a video message, and I quote, "This day highlights a basic truth. All our freedom depends on press freedom. Freedom of the press is the foundation of democracy and justice. It gives all of us the facts we need to shape opinions and speak truth to power. And as this year's theme reminds us, press freedom represents the very lifeblood of human rights," unquote. However, this right also comes with responsibilities. We all know about the problems of an oversupply of information, the need to make the right selection, and to judge real from fake news. About all this, you will hear tonight from a panel of distinguished speakers, and I wish you all an interesting evening and a lively discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Brigitta Blaha. Now I'm happy to introduce Christo Buschek to you. He's an investigative journalist at Spiegel and Paper Trail Media. As a software engineer, he develops digital tools for collecting journalistic data. We happened to meet at another keynote at the Parliament, so I'm really happy that it worked out that you're here spontaneously. His programs have been used to create the largest archive of war crimes in the Syrian civil war. Christo Buschek was awarded the 2021 Pulitzer Prize for his investigative work on Chinese internment camps. He's also a program fellow at the University of New York. Christo, Thank you so much for joining us tonight, especially because of the circumstances today. You have a little back injury, that's why you're here via video cam. So thank you that you beat the pain and be here tonight. Thank you so much. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. And it's easy to beat the pain if you have painkillers. They're really doing a marvelous job. Before I start, I want to thank the ClubDA and the Rotary Club, and especially you, Ms. Ernest, for inviting me and allowing me to talk to you today. I really wish I was with you in person, but I guess this is the second best thing we can do today. So, as it was already mentioned a few times, but this year marks the 30th anniversary of the proclamation of World Press Freedom Day, which celebrates the fundamental principles of press freedom and pays tribute to journalists who have risked their lives to report the truth. I was 13 at the time of this proclamation. In 1993, I was far more interested in playing computer games than press freedom. Back then, if I wanted to play those games with my friends, I had to physically carry my computer under my arm to my friend's place and connect our computers directly with a cable. Nowadays, no one has to do that anymore. If kids today want to play computer games with each other, they connect through the internet, quickly, without a second thought. It just works. Everything is expected to do that nowadays. It's evident that the internet has brought about significant changes in our lives over the past 3 decades, and I'm sure we all have noticed this. The internet and technology generally lies at the intersection of every aspect of our lives: relationships, politics, knowledge, you name it. Indeed, to paraphrase Arthur C. Clarke, our technology is the closest thing we have to magic. The world has changed significantly since 1993, when World Press Freedom Day was proclaimed. One invention that the internet brought forth is social media. When it arrived, we celebrated it as a force for democracy. I think by now, no one still believes that. It feels more like a hangover than democracy. With the rise of social media came the rise of disinformation. It propelled disinformation to new heights. We use the term disinformation to describe several phenomena, and I want to point out 2 here. On the one hand, we have ideological networks engaging in disinformation. We have seen many of those during the coronavirus pandemic. And on the other hand, we are dealing with coordinated disinformation by malicious actors. I want to distinguish between those two, since we must treat them differently. Let me dive deeper into both, starting with coordinated disinformation. I was privileged to recently participate in 2 investigations centered around a malicious actor developing disinformation capabilities and engaging in disinformation campaigns. The first investigation was Story Killer, which started when over 100 journalists from 30 different media outlets continued the work of Gauri Lankesh, an Indian journalist who was shot dead at her home in Bangalore. Her work focused on attacks against press freedom and underlined the danger of disinformation. Forbidden Stories coordinated this investigation in Paris. As part of this larger project, we investigated a clandestine group that offers the manipulation of democratic elections, hacking, and disinformation as a service. The name of this group was Team Jorge. My colleagues Gur Megiddo, Omer Ben Jacob, and Frédéric Metterseau posed as potential clients. They managed to record in an undercover operation 5 online meetings, many encrypted chats, and even were able to record 2 in-person meetings with a hidden camera. They pretended to represent a wealthy businessman with financial interests in postponing a presidential election in a Central African country, a service Team Jorge happily provides. Part of the tactics that Team Jorge deploys is the active use of disinformation campaigns in social media platforms. For this purpose, they developed a piece of software called AIMS, Advanced impact media solutions. This software allows to automate the creation of online identities, so-called avatars, on hundreds of different internet platforms and centrally controls those avatars. Avatars are accounts that often, on first look, appear like real people. Sometimes they try to mimic the behavior of real people even. Software like AIMS allows an operator to create online identities en masse with a few clicks. Avatars form the backbone of coordinated disinformation campaigns. The most basic functionality of avatars is to post content and engage in discussions. This can happen fully automated or with manual intervention, but this is only where it usually starts. Our research identified 1,800 such avatars which AIMS controlled, engaging in up to 20 disinformation campaigns. But Team Jorge was boasting that they control over 30,000 such avatars, many more than we could identify. I want to mention also the second investigation into coordinated disinformation that was released like a month ago, the Vulcan Files. Again, this was an extensive investigation by an international consortium of over 50 journalists from 8 different countries and 11 different media outlets. Paper Trail Media and the Spiegel coordinated the investigation. The Vulcan Files are a leak of documents from a software company called NTC Vulcan, a supplier of software technology and infrastructure for the Russian military and security agencies. They allowed us a peek into the cyber warfare capabilities of the Russian state. In those documents, we find the description of a software to do the same thing that AIMS could do as well, creating thousands of avatars and controlling them centrally by operators of the Russian military. And again, we found 1,000 such avatars and over 20 organized disinformation campaigns that we could attribute to the Vulcan Files. But here, even more so than with Team Jorge, we must assume that there are tens of thousands more active avatars which the Russian military or the FSB controls. A critical insight of the Vulcan Files is that hacking and disinformation are part of the same cyber strategy of the Russian state. To put it differently, shutting down the electricity grid with a virus or posting on Twitter are two sides of the same coin. Coordinated disinformation can currently only be countered by using investigative methods. Investigative journalism is an essential antidote and tool at our disposal to combat coordinated disinformation. No law or regulation will stop the Russian state or the Team Jorges of the world. Sadly, platforms don't make it easy for us. Access to the internals of platforms is restricted, and we often have to conduct our research from the outside. Moving forward, we require access and means to scrutinize the internals of social media platforms and not just measure the effect of those. I want to shift my focus now. While investigating the Vulcan Files, we found a vast network of accounts close or in the vicinity or around our coordinated avatars, different accounts. But those accounts obsessively publish content around the coronavirus, the government, the system, the war in Ukraine, the AfD, the FPÖ. We found accounts in French, in English, in German. Some accounts are very active. They post 50, 60, and sometimes up to 100 times daily. A significant percentage of those posts contains falsehoods. Those are networks that we call ideological networks. Accounts in ideological networks are not necessarily automated. Behind many of those accounts, we expect individuals or groups of people. Those accounts are on a mission and the output is targeted. Now, is it wrong to publish something false? Well, I'm not an expert, but I would say probably on a moral level, yes, but not always from the perspective of the law. Actors in those ideological networks make use of the right of freedom of expression. Ideological networks are, in my opinion, harder to counter. We always had to contend with ideological disinformation. But due to cultural reasons and technological limitations, the media functioned as a gatekeeper. And the vibrant landscape of different media outlets creates checks and balances to mitigate that media itself becomes ideological disinformation. Or so was the theory. Media certainly doesn't always live up to this ideal, but many do try. But now we live in a world where every individual is its own media. Journalism is not a gatekeeper anymore as it used to be, and it never will be again. The question arises then, if platforms should be the gatekeepers instead. It does strike me as weird that unlike in newspapers or radio or on TV, social media platforms are not liable for the content that is published on social media. This, in my opinion, creates very skewed incentives. Social media is probably one of the most influential inventions of the last 15 years. It fundamentally changed our society, our politics, and our media landscape. And people love social media, they truly do. Social media platforms are gigantic machines that are optimized to grab our attention. When we look at disinformation software like AIMS, we must recognize that it's not very complicated software. In today's social media platforms, getting far with disinformation requires little effort. The return on investment for operators of disinformation is incredibly high. I want to point out two more recent technological changes that fundamentally will change the face of disinformation. The first is generative models, and the second is synthetic media. We have been bombarded for weeks now by news about ChatGPT and its siblings. ChatGPT is what we call a generative language model. To simplify, it can generate text based on statistical probabilities. It sees a word and then just estimates how likely which other word would follow that first word. But generative models are not reduced to just text. They can generate images, audio, and video as well. We all have seen the pictures of the Pope in a fancy Balenciaga jacket, or the arrest of Donald Trump in Manhattan, or the fake Drake video last week. Synthetic media combines all those possibilities to produce whole media categories. Synthetic media generates an article for a topic, illustrates the article with a generated image, and then embeds a generated video. The dream is to create those articles on the fly and to remove the human in the process. Media outlets like CNET or BuzzFeed generate a whole category of articles in that way already today. Yesterday, a report was published by Mackenzie Sadeghi and Lorenzo Avanitis. They identified in this report 49 AI-generated news websites. Those 49 websites spawn 7 different languages and contain content entirely or mostly generated by generative models designed to mimic human communication. In this case, the motivation for doing this appears to be financial. The websites are content farms, and the monetization happens through ads. But it does not take a lot of fantasy to imagine how organized or ideological disinformation networks would use those technological advances as well. Generative models and synthetic media will become a staple of political agitation and disinformation within months, and I'm convinced of this. Today, politicians of the far-right AfD in Germany already use generated images to advance the political agenda and spread fear. While the content might be generated or fake, the reactions are certainly not. Neither the emotions that such content can stir up. Combining those three technologies, social media, generative models, and synthetic media, will cause huge issues for our societies in general, but specifically for us journalists. Malicious actors won't be limited to reinterpreting reality, but they can create a new reality as they see fit. It will become more complex and demanding for us to distinguish between what is real and what is not. Already today, I cannot distinguish between a generated text written by ChatGPT or a text written by a human. It requires a fact check to reveal the use of generative language models. Generative images we can still identify by looking at them closer. Often the faces or hands are a little bit off, but it became more challenging to do so in the last 6 months. Luckily, videos are still easily recognizable unless the video undergoes heavy post-production. Disinformation is a weapon, and whether we like it or not, it is wielded like one. The boundaries between the physical and the digital world are not just overlapping anymore, but they are eroding. In the words of Maria Ressa, online violence is real-world violence. For us to be able to commemorate World Press Freedom Day for the next 30 years as well, we journalists will have to adapt. Since I'm not a writing journalist, my following statement will sound somewhat self-serving, but I strongly believe journalism is no longer just a writing profession. Journalists of the future will be designers to communicate with more than just words. They will be programmers to build new tools and new methods that allow them to engage with this world. They will no longer be lone wolves fighting the good fight, but instead there will be teams collaborating across boundaries defined by fields and organizations to speak truth to power. Journalists of the future must engage with the space where the physical and the digital worlds collide. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Christo Buschek. It was a really inspiring speech and keynote, but not only inspiring, but really my heart is heavy thinking about how many Team Jorges exists out there. And my heart is heavy thinking about that so many journalists don't have the opportunity to work in groups. Therefore, we discuss even further. Mr. Buschek, do you feel well enough to join the panel discussion? You just let us know if it's changing.
No, I would love to. I'm really looking forward to it.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Now I would like to introduce our panel. Jackie Park, Head of Network Strategy and Innovation at International Press Institute. Claudia Isseb, Deputy Secretary General at the Austrian UNESCO Commission. And Erhard Stackel, Vice President, Reporters Without Borders in Austria. So thank you, first of all, for joining me on stage, joining us at the Rotary Club, joining us at the DA, at the Diplomatic Academy. I'm really happy that so many students are also here with us online. And we have a concentrated load of knowledge on media topics on stage, which is just amazing. And I would like to start with you, Mr. Stackel, but please take your time. No, take your time.
Yeah,
So tomorrow is Press Freedom Day. And of course, it's an important day for Reporters Without Borders. We're expecting the Press Freedom Index tomorrow. And I think it will also be presented in a press conference by your president. And just to explain the index very briefly, it aims to compare the level of press freedom in different countries or territories. And you compare 180 countries, as far as I remember, so almost the whole globe. And I'm sure you won't be allowed what you are telling us tomorrow in the press conference, but is there a trend emerging, and especially is there a trend emerging in Europe?
Well, the topic of this discussion tonight is already telling us one of the elements that are a key to understand the situation of the world press freedom today. Fake news is an important subject, and political propaganda is another one. Of these 180 countries that are scrutinized in this index, that has become over these 30 years a kind of hard currency in this field of surveys of press freedom. There's about 1/4 of these countries that are where the media freedom is in a very good or good situation. 1/4 where it is in a problematic situation. And half of those 180 have a bad or very bad situation. On top, there will be no change. There are always countries from Scandinavia. And then at the end, Asian countries like China, North Korea, Vietnam. What is striking is that new democracies that developed, the World Press Freedom Day is 30 years old, but already 2 years earlier, Reporters Without Borders, which was a small non-governmental organization seated in Paris, had asked for this, or had propagated this idea. And then when the first index came out, because this was the time of the violent disintegration of Yugoslavia, it was the end of the Soviet Union, and it was only a short while after the beginning of the democratization of the countries in Eastern Europe. And at that time, everybody was thinking, as Timothy Gartner-Ash, the British historian, just recently said in an interview, it was a hubris, he said, to assume that this will go on like this forever. There will be democracy, and especially in countries where, for instance, that they are becoming members of the European Union, or a path was opened for them to join the European Union. Their basic liberties, like the freedom of the media, would be guaranteed, which, as we know, was not the case. And also, what we will see tomorrow, there is no major shift in this. There has been a downward movement, less media freedom, less plurality, less security for journalists in several of these countries. And the question is, what to do? What can be done to counter this development? Yesterday, the New York Times had an article writing about the renunciation of one of the chief engineers from Google, or the number one, Geoffrey Hinton, who said, very soon from now, the internet will be flooded with images, texts, and videos that the ordinary person cannot distinguish the real ones from the fake ones, and it will be very difficult. Later on, for Reporters Without Borders and others, they're having some ideas what can be done. But for the beginning, I want to leave it with this. It is a difficult situation, and more this year than last year, the propaganda question and the fake news is coming to the foreground.
Thank you for these insights. So that is not a good outlook, I would say. So less plurality means less freedom. And we will also elaborate on how we can counter these developments. I think democratic societies are inconceivable without a free and pluralistic media landscape. So freedom of expression, media diversity in general, and the safety of journalists are also topics of the UNESCO and the UNESCO commissions all around the globe. Ms. Isep, I would like to ask you in this first round how UNESCO defines press freedom and why this day is still needed? I think we already have the explanation from the Freedom Index, but why is it so important to still work on it?
Yes, yeah, thank you very much, first of all, also from my side for the very kind invitation. I'm very happy to be here with you tonight. So, I mean, we've already heard that World Press Freedom Day was proclaimed by the UN General Assembly back in 1993, and I find it very important also to point out that this in turn was a response to a call by African journalists who in 1991 produced the landmark Windhoek Declaration. So, and that declaration was published on May 3, so that's why we're celebrating Press Freedom Day on May 3. And yes, how does UNESCO define press freedom? I would say, we've heard it before, this year's theme is shaping a future of rights, freedom of expression as a driver for all other human rights. And I guess that's kind of the answer I would give here, that UNESCO really conceives press freedom and the freedom of expression within the context of its human rights mandate, and really is a fundamental pillar of all other human rights. And actually, UNESCO just published an analysis of a data set that very clearly points to the fact that in countries, in regions where press freedom is strong and is really, has a strong standing, also all other human rights are stronger. So there's less inequalities in terms of gender balance, less inequalities in terms of socioeconomic status, etc., where press freedom is strong. So really, press freedom is quite fundamental here. Why do we need this day still? I mean, a lot has been said already, and I would even say we need it more than ever. So it's getting more and more important, and UNESCO's projects and activities in the field are manifold. And I really just wanted to point out very briefly that UNESCO also has put in place something that's called the Observatory of Killed Journalists. So UNESCO monitors the killings of journalists worldwide, and thus not only monitor the killings, but also investigates into the question of impunity, which is still extremely high. And we've seen, when you look at the figures that are published here, that when we compare, for example, the years 2021 and 2022, there's been a significant rise in killings of journalists worldwide. So that's one thing. And then, of course, and I mean, we've heard a lot in the keynote already, the challenges that are posed by the digital environment. I think we could go on here for an hour, but maybe I'll just stop at this very moment, and we can go deeper into that at a later point. Yeah.
I also have another following question. So you think that journalism in general is strengthening all human rights, because
yes.
It also shed light. It shed light to different other human rights, and also to hurdles we come to, and a lot of other crimes and war crimes as well. Today, the 30th anniversary event of the World Press Day is also taking place in the UN General Assembly, and there's a full day of plenaries, and I think that is one of the topics that journalism is strengthening other human rights. Yes. Maybe you can also elaborate on the program today in New York.
Exactly. Well, so it's really, the program today in New York is really focused on the way press freedom and the freedom of expression contributes to all other human rights under UNESCO's mandate. So that would be the right to education, the right of scholars to freely express themselves, also cultural rights, very importantly. So there's really a full day of lectures, discussions, all kinds of events going on in New York today to really mark also this 30th anniversary of World Press Freedom Day and what's happening tonight. I'm not sure in New York time. So
we're a little bit ahead. So maybe there's another declaration.
Probably not, but today, and that's very an important thing too. Tonight, UNESCO's World Freedom Prize, the Guillermo Cano Prize, will be awarded. We still don't know who will be the winner this year, but for example, in the past years, I think last or 2 years ago, Maria Ressa, who's been mentioned already, received that prize. So that's also part of the program tonight, and it really brings together the UN family as well as stakeholders from academia, media professionals, etc., to really go into the topic.
Perfect. So back to Europe. Ms. Park, the IPI, the International Press Institute, is a global network. So if we take a little tour of editors, media executives, and leading journalists. And your mission is to defend media freedom and support independent journalism in general. And what's your view on media freedom in Europe before we take a more global look? And what is the IPI focusing on Media Freedom Day?
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for explaining, briefly about IPI, because I think it is important to let you know that it is a global network. It was started in 1950, and its journalists, editors, and publishers come together because they know by, working together, we build solidarity. We're stronger. We have a stronger voice, and we work on press freedom and independent journalism. So that means that we're monitoring and raising our voice, and through advocacy and research, and publishing and writing about journalism and cases of press freedom, and bringing support where colleagues need that. But we're also very much working to strengthen media itself and ensure that there is a bright future, a vibrant future for independent journalism. And I think, we'll get a chance to talk about this hopefully, but it's not all bad news, actually. We feel quite positive about journalism, and a lot of the challenges that we are going through are also bringing about a kind of renaissance in some parts. So, but getting to your question about Europe, I think, there's some great journalism being done, and we'll talk about that. But they're definitely on the press freedom side, I think, over the last couple of years, there's been a sense that countries that felt that they had great press freedom now, worry that they also need to be careful. So, for example, Finland this year, the decision convicting 2 journalists in January of giving away state secrets was, I think, a big wake-up call for journalism, and a lot of journalists, felt that would have a very chilling effect, obviously, on journalism in, across Scandinavia, but also across Europe. So, and then that's contrasted with the other parts of Europe, I think, which are dealing with a rising authoritarianism and the kind of impacts that has. And I think one of the worrying things about often dealing with these cases is that it's hard to really pinpoint the attacks on press freedom, because it's all done, if you like, within the legal systems that exist. So it makes it quite difficult, and the way that those attacks occur often is, like through media capture, for example. So where, parties, either the government or parties close to the government, buy up and control the media. It's also the attempts to control the media are through advertising, and that has quite a big impact, because for media in a lot of countries, advertising is a really important source of income, a revenue source. When media is under so much pressure, to actually, not even be profitable, but just to be sustainable. So when, so that those kind of things are having real impact. But I think, the way journalists are responding is also interesting, and I'll come to that because I know we'll talk about that in a minute, but in terms of, building strong media which serves the communities. But in terms of how IPI is talking, I guess, about press freedom globally.
Exactly.
Yeah, so we are, obviously we it's really important that we're putting a spotlight on the attacks on press freedom globally, and they, happen in many ways, as I say, through this kind of rising authoritarianism. There's also like a kind of lawfare, so-called, going on in a lot of, in quite a number of countries against media, where they're being, using the legal processes that exist, so criminal defamation where it exists, or just defamation, or it might be business investigations to really cripple the media. Of course, physical attacks, online harassment. There's a whole range of issues that we're dealing with. But one of the things that we particularly wanted to spotlight this year, of course, was the impact on journalism and media from the war in Ukraine. And IPI has been tracking instances, those attacks on media, since the war started, since the second wave of the war, I should say, started in February last year. And we've documented 980 cases, and that's a public database which is available on the IPI website. And, so you can actually see, and it is the media in Ukraine, operating in Ukraine, which is really bearing the brunt of those attacks, and the bulk of them, as you would expect, have been committed by the Russian military or Russian state. And of course, there's 11 journalists have been killed there in Ukraine since the war started, and most recently was last week with when Bogdan Bitic was killed, and he was a journalist working with the La Repubblica, Italian newspaper there. And of course, then also there's the attacks on journalists in Russia and free media. And we've seen, Evan Gershkovich, his detainment on spying, espionage charges in Russia. And, beyond that, so many media, independent journalism has really had to completely relocate out of Russia. And so that's one of the things that we're looking very much at, is how do we support journalists who are still trying to do journalism and informing their communities from exile.
Yeah.
So
what a great work, and I get goosebumps everywhere. This is like the toughest kind of attacks to media, because it threatens lives. We also heard about other forms of attacking. Mr. Stackel, you've been in Poland for a recent study, so their attacks on the media or influence on the media is more subtle, with the result that more than half of the respondents of this study in the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, and Poland are concerned about the state of press freedom. So there is like a bottom-up approach on asking questions on how people read media and how they trust media. And when asked where the threat to media freedom came from, the respondents in Poland, as far as I remember, and Hungary named the government first, while in the Czech Republic it was the media owners. Maybe you can elaborate on those different kind of influences. I would not name it attack, and I don't feel happy in pointing fingers, but
No.
You have
the index
you've been there physically, right?
Yes.
You've been part of the study, so maybe you can elaborate on that.
The index of Reporters Without Borders is a result of asking experts in the individual countries, and it's a long questionnaire and so. But this, what was presented in Warsaw last week, It's a public opinion poll. There were 1,000 persons older than 18 years asked, 1,000 in the Czech Republic, 1,000 in Slovakia, 1,000 in Hungary, and 1,000 in Poland. And this is already the second time around. Last year they did the same, and it's growing concern. Yeah? So this more than half of the people, of the respondents, were concerned about the situation of press freedom, and in Poland it was even 71%. There is a difference in the age groups. In general, older people, older respondents were more concerned, younger less so. In the Czech Republic, for instance, 1/3 of the younger people said they are concerned, one said they're not concerned, and 1/3 said they don't care about it. Whereas in Slovakia, where we remember 5 years ago a journalist was killed, Jan Kuciak, and there was a tremendous scandal, and the awareness was growing for the danger for reporters, the mafia structures that exist in the country and so. And this made people much more aware. So there, 60% of the young people are concerned about the press freedom. Of course, they were breaking this down according to party affiliations. Those supporting the governing party in Hungary or in Poland, they were much less concerned, which is obvious, while those supporting the opposition, they were tremendously concerned. But all of them, more than 3/4 of the people asked, said press freedom is very important for our democracy, independently from their political conviction. When asked who can help to make this situation more favorable for press freedom, people named in the first place journalistic associations, on the ground, but also international ones, and then as number 2, the European Union, which is interesting because from the European Commission there are efforts made now for a European Freedom of Media Act, where of course there's the governments of Poland and Hungary are not in favor of this, but there's also strong opposition from Germany and from Austria. Because they say, no, we don't need this, why should Brussels interfere? But the idea is that there should be a network, and a safety net for the democracy and freedom. While this presentation was going on in Warsaw, one member of the audience stood up and said, I'm not a journalist, I'm a lawyer. But when there is no freedom of the judiciary, no independence of the judiciary, you can forget about the freedom of the press too. And he has a point in this. So authoritarian regimes, they attack usually at the same time the media, the judiciary, and also academia. Therefore, it is necessary, and we talked a few minutes before this started, that institutions like UNESCO and others, they're putting together the efforts of all these fields, because one is not, it's too weak, it will not work. It needs a joint effort to defend democracy, but as it has been said here, it's totally my conviction too, without the free press, there is no democracy.
Exactly. We will also talk about the democratic aspect and education soon. First of all, I want to ask Mr. Buschek a personal question. You were working from different countries, from different territories. Also data and the work with data and technology makes it easier to work from everywhere. Do you feel safer or differently protected in different countries, and especially when you work on topics such as the Syrian civil war or Chinese camps? Do you feel that you're safe in Europe working on these topics, or is it connected to the topic you're working on?
For the question, do I feel safe? Yes, I do feel safe here. But I think it's also related to the fact that my work is not targeting the place where I'm living. So when I'm like living in Berlin and I'm researching internment camps in Xinjiang in China, this is really, really far away. And like my personal life is safe. So I think it really matters, and it depends on like the type of work that you're doing, the type of journalism. And I think they're very, very different forms of journalism as well. So I can only speak also from my own perspective. But so for us doing this kind of like large scale investigations that are very distributed, security and safety is a very, very big topic. Like at Paper Trail Media, for example, we almost talk weekly about security issues. And we do have to like distinguish between like physical security and digital security. I think working distributed or working the type of work that we do, digital security is a very, very big topic. It's maybe even bigger than physical security. I had a friend, I had drinks with a friend recently. He's like a friend and a colleague, and I don't know what happened, but he was in a very bad mood, I guess. But he said that like, he thinks that very, very soon something would happen very, very close to us. Like we do remember, like there are some high-profile killings of journalists in Europe as well, be it Daphne Galizia or Jan Kuciak or Peter de Vries. And he had this idea that like something has to happen very, very soon. And I think this is a reality. And I think it was already mentioned that like 2022, there were like more killings of journalists than ever before, the years before. I think we also try to protect ourselves. I think like, I mean, it's nice if like the European Union would like set up mechanisms that protect journalists more. And I think this is like great, like thanks for that. But I think we also have to protect ourselves. And so we make security a topic. And there are also like initiatives that come out of this situation. So I do want to, I mentioned Forbidden Stories before, but I want to mention them again because they're actually like, the whole idea or the theory is like based around this issue of like journalists being killed, and then like how can you provide safety to journalists doing the work. And so what Forbidden Stories does is like they say that like if a journalist gets killed, we pick up the work they did and continue with it. So it gets like less interesting for bad actors to kill as journalists because they know like the work will be continued. So this happened with Gauri Lankesh, where like over 100 journalists worldwide picked up her work. Or it happened also like with Rafael Moreno, a Colombian journalist who just like a week before he got murdered spoke with Forbidden Stories. What Forbidden Stories does, like they created like a project that's called like the Safe Box network. And it's kind of like an insurance policy. You as a journalist, you can upload all your research into the SafeBox network with instructions where you can say like, if something happens to me, please do that with this material. So the whole idea is that like, if something happens to you, other people know what to do and how to continue this work. And so I think like these are very, very interesting projects. And I think Forbidden Stories is a very interesting model of like where journalists can protect themselves and try to like take care of the safety worldwide. Yeah.
So I cannot say it often enough. Thank you again for your great work, and also for the network you're building, and yeah, in general, to all journalists. So network, you said, is an endurance, which I find very, yeah, also optimistically, yeah, positive. Ms. Park, you told me that you can also talk on how independent media is responding in some parts of the world to attempts to stifle and suppress journalism. And I think that also works through networks. Maybe you can give us some insights on this network work.
Yeah, definitely. Look, over many years, I have worked, well, globally, but particularly in Asia and in South Asia, where it could be particularly dangerous. I could see the real impact of journalists coming together. Yep. So through journalists associations, which really, you know, and building a voice where they can, you know, push back against attacks on press freedom in the country. They can also reach out and build regional networks, which have a very positive impact, and then globally, you know, link into global networks. So networks is I think really important. How journalists are responding generally to attacks, I think solidarity is important, and the journalists coming together is one of the ways to do that. But I think another way, I mean, look, there are really different, areas, and I think, as Fritz pointed out, there's like a quarter of the world which is really bad, and there are countries like, Afghanistan, Myanmar, Russia, Belarus, where it's almost, it's not impossible, because I know journalism is being done there, and in very creative and innovative ways, but it's very difficult. And, so most journalists, if they can get out, they often will, and they'll try to build media, that outside of the country and report in. We work with a number of journalists, who are our members in Myanmar, and I know that, a lot of the media owners and the editors have actually moved outside of the country. They're based in India or in Thailand, but they're still very much coordinating with their local networks of journalists in the country and finding really innovative ways to kind of get the news in, including like going back to some really basic things like, just using phones. So in a village, somebody would actually just read the news, and people would gather around and could listen, when information is really under pressure at that time. So there's, I think, innovative things being done there, and we've seen also in Belarus, the way that journalists are finding ways to get, to continue to report on what's going on in that country and get that news, into the communities where they need it. Where there is space for journalism still, but it's, under pressure. And, we've talked a little bit about, what that pressure looks like, particularly, when, populist authoritarianism is on the rise here and, in many places across the world. Then the governments, I think, find it easier to control the bigger corporate media for the reason that I explained around advertising is one of the big things. When the government advertising revenues are like 40% of your income, and the government threatens or can withdraw that, then you can see that that's a lever of control. It doesn't mean that the editors or the publishers, owners, agree with it, but it has that kind of impact, unfortunately. There are other ways to control that. But what I think, what we're particularly seeing where that is happening, where there is a failure of the big, old legacy corporate media, that there's a rise of new independent journalism, coming up. And that can be anything from one or two, member newsrooms that are just trying to really inform maybe just their very local community, or it could be like national, news organisations. And one, example is very close by here in Hungary, and which is Telex. So when Index was bought, by really, captured, you could say, by the government, then the journalists walked out and they appealed to their readers, to fund them. They recognised that we can't, get there, through the traditional routes, and they had a massive fundraising campaign and raised a whole lot of money to get that off the ground. And 5 years later, it's, one of the most important media houses in Hungary, and it's still providing, a really reliable source of news and information, trusted news and information. And the difference is that it's a different way of thinking about journalism, and I think that's really the shift that we are seeing, is that, really successful journalism today needs to understand what its audience needs and wants from it, and it needs to serve that audience. And part of that shift has come about because of the change in the business arrangements. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So where media used to be funded by advertising, primarily, almost exclusively, in many cases, media now looks to its audiences to provide those revenues. And so, of course, that shifts. It's a complete shift. You go from, a business-to-business relationship, where really the business isn't journalism, it's advertising, to a business-to-consumer or a, media to audience relationship where it's a B2C business. And so that changes everything.
Exactly.
And so it means your journalism has to be much better. It needs to be providing what people need and want. And when you provide that real value, then people will support you. Whether it's through reader revenues or whether it's through other kinds of, support. And I think that's underlying, a lot of the change, and the journalism that understands that and builds that relationship with the audience and brings the audience into the journalism is the future. And that's why I'm optimistic, because I see that everywhere. I see that around the world happening in some of the the darkest places. The journalism is rebuilding because people need access to news and information, and they're willing to support it when you give them something that they care about, that is relevant, and they can understand that.
I'm really, really happy about that statement, because it's also something we realize in Austria. I myself work for the media regulatory, and we can really see the shift to transformation, to a change of also the business model in general, the more dialogue-oriented way, and we of course support it. Before we open and shift this, the view also in this room, and we open the floor to the audience soon, I would like to ask you, Ms. Issab, what is your view, and how do you think we can improve the situation in Austria, but also general? And I think that media in general is in this shift you just described, that we're more in a focused way on reaching young people and also improving the dialogue with the young audience. How does education and also media competence plays a role in it?
Yes. I guess, you can never overestimate the role education plays here, and it's extremely important, I think, for all of us to really think of how we can reach young audiences particularly. So I think on the one hand, we really need to start early here. And within our commission, but also within the Austrian broader context of education, we really see already now, and I think it's extremely important, a shift towards early childhood education and care. So to really, tackle the problem, it might not even be a problem, but to tackle the issue from the very beginning and then to never stop. So UNESCO's focus also is very much a focus on lifelong learning. So the idea is really here to start as soon as possible with what we would call media and information literacy, and then to, really have it throughout all life stages. And then I think what's also very helpful here, and in the first moment it might sound a bit, I don't know, even naive maybe, but UNESCO has put in place an educational concept that's called global citizenship education, and that really focuses on the idea that while our world is probably increasingly interconnected, human rights violations, inequality, poverty, etc., still very profound threats to peace and to sustainability, and I mean that's in the end what it's all about, right? So this concept of global citizenship education really tries to focus on four or five areas: creativity, innovation, commitment to peace, and I think above all, human rights and sustainable development. And if we kind of find ways to implement that into curricula worldwide and to, really push forward initiatives that would make those core areas of what we might call global citizenship education, if we really push that forward, I think the world might be a better place maybe at some point. But so to narrow it down a bit on because that's like it's a more broader focus than the discussions we had before. UNESCO is very actively educating media and information literacy. The organization has just published, I think, very hands-on and very useful media and information literacy curriculum for teachers last year, and we're trying to get it translated into German now to make it available for the context. So that's also one of our missions, maybe as the national commissions worldwide, that we try to involve people really on the ground. And I think, that's also, I mean, Mr. Stachel said it before, we need joint efforts here, and we need all kinds of institutions in formal education as well as non-formal education, and partners from civil society, from academia, to really be able to reach out to basically everyone. I don't know if that kind of answers the question.
No, perfect, thank you. Now I have a joint question to Mr. Buschek and Mr. Stachel, because I think that also the education of journalists plays a general role. And do you think that journalism in general improves media literacy? Maybe I start with Mr. Stachel and then I go to Mr. Buschek.
I do not quite understand that media literacy is improved by journalists.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. This meeting in Warsaw, by the way, Hungary was represented by somebody from Telex, so they are recognized in Central Europe already. I asked a colleague from Slovakia about this, why are the younger people more interested there in the press and media freedom than in other countries? And he said, besides that there was a general atmosphere for this, all the news organizations formed a united platform on the internet called Vienna, and one could have a subscription for all the interesting things on the internet with just paying one fee. And this became fashionable among young people. So it is possible to do this, that it becomes fashionable, but it needs some preparation. And I think this is not the question of the journalists, it's the question of the management. And managers of news companies, they have been sleeping for many years. And the world changed, and now they wake up and they're shocked. It's time they do something about it. But of course, the journalists, I think journalism in general has improved a lot. It's, for instance, in this country, investigative journalism, you could number the investigative journalists on
some fingers,
the fingers on one hand. And now it's many of them, what we heard before, when somebody is silenced, that others will pick up the story. These are fantastic developments, or these international networks. And many other things, that there are improvements of the quality of journalism, but when the economic base is crumbling, what shall one do? And just one more thing to counter this danger of the fake news. For instance, Reporters Without Borders has a new initiative. It's called the Journalism Trust Initiative, together with Agence France Presse and other partners, where they give a kind of seal of approval to media outlets, so that they can go around and say, we are not spreading fake news, we are serious media. For instance, the public television of Lithuania has asked for it, and they are coming in experts, and they check it, and so there are about, I think, 500 news outlets at the moment looking for this. One example is TV Dozht, the TV Rain from Russia, that they had escaped. They went to Latvia, and then they were not allowed to broadcast from there anymore, or to operate via internet. And now they're in Amsterdam, and they received this seal of approval that they are not spreading propaganda, which could be helpful. It is one initiative. It's not very known, widely known still. Maybe there will be others, but these are necessary efforts. I don't know how they will do it from the technical side to find out if there is. Yeah, this would be interesting to hear if there are possibilities to find out where there were. Political propaganda is another thing. Yeah? There are many countries where the media, they are just subverted by ideological propaganda, by pressure, by conviction, by threats, whatever. But the outcome is the same. There's one-sided reporting. But in the case of the fake information, it's much more difficult to distinguish and to find out, and also to help the individual news outlets to fight off the danger that will be infiltrated with fake news.
So, Mr. Buschek, we're back to your keynote, actually. You mentioned that journalists have to be designers and programmers soon. Do you think that the education for journalists is on that level already, or do you think it's, again, a network we have to build on exchanging views?
I think definitely a network. I would not expect a journalist to be everything in one person. I think that's a very unrealistic idea, and I think it will never work out. But I think we have to just broaden the definition of what journalism entails and what it needs. And so, for example, my background is a technical one. I'm a programmer, but I also try to do investigation. I'm not a great journalist. I've never learned the craft of journalism. But I work with journalists. I try to engage with them on the same level and learn the language and learn what's necessary and what's important in the field, because that allows me then to basically take this knowledge and build better tools or look for technical approaches that journalists maybe haven't thought about. So I think it's really just about to think of journalism as a field that became much bigger and requires more competence, more expertise, different types of expertise. I think that's an important one. And I just wanted to maybe come back to this question about the media literacy. So I hear often that journalism is in a crisis, right? And so I think this is actually really not true. I think newspapers are in crisis. That's probably true. But journalism is actually doing really well. The type of journalism, the quality of journalism that is produced in the last years is exceptional sometimes. And I think, especially when we talk about the field of investigative journalism, it's not just me that thinks this, but a lot of people said it's the golden age of investigative journalism at the moment. The tools and the methods that people have available to them to actually do investigation improved massively over the last years. So when we talk about young people and their interest into media and stuff like this, I think we often make the mistake to think that young people are not interested and we have to change or simplify our language, our content in order to appeal. But I think actually that's not the case. I think what young people are looking for is they want to understand the values and the respect in the reporting. They want to understand who's talking to them. And I think a lot of times young people don't want to be talked down or feel a sense of being that someone is condescending or something like this. And so I think that's what young people are looking for, not different types of journalism. I think young people really want good stories. They still like stories. They like investigations. They like journalism.
That is actually a quite optimistic outlook. So newspapers and media houses are probably in crisis, but journalism is not. So I would like to end here and open the floor to the audience. Please feel free to ask questions. So first, and then Jakob.
Thanks very much for a very interesting discussion. I'm a former vice president of ABC Television, and I'd like to know about more about the deep fakes and the AI. I know that there's software that exists, so if you use ChatGPT to write an article or something, you can check, and because of the way the words are generated, you can have some certainty whether it's generated by AI or not. So what more can we do in that regard? And also, another question I might ask is, we humans tend to do very poorly in dealing with technology, and we only deal with the moral, ethical problems once the horse is out of the barn. So what can we do now that the AI horse is out of the barn to try to get foundations and things to help produce tools so that we can use them? And about media literacy, I think the media literacy of journalists is very good, but the media literacy of audiences is not so good. And I think we can enhance journalism by enhancing, we're in countries that'll accept it, to teach media literacy so young people especially will know what to look for and to be able to spot, who's real and who's not. And I think those are all important. Thanks for letting me talk so long.
Thank you. I think that's a good start if Mr. Buschek would start on the generated content question, because you worked on it for quite some time now.
Yes. So the question about like moral and ethics in technology, I think that's actually this fundamental question that we have. The whole field of machine learning and artificial intelligence did not really think about it. Like, we are talking about problems in the data sets, problems in the models for over 10 years already. The problem is that, like, when you build technology, you always have a set of design constraints. You define explicitly or implicit what is important to you. And the machine learning community kind of decided that, like, speed and scale are important, but like not accuracy, for example. And this is a fundamental problem. I think technologists have to understand that, like, the world is not just technology. It's not like a neutral, abstract thing that you just do on your laptop. Like, the things that you build on your laptop do matter. And I think this is a big, big problem, and probably at the core of a lot of the problems that we are facing at the moment. In terms of like what we can do in terms of tools or methods, I think if we have we need different tools, we need better tools, but I think it's a little bit, it's unrealistic to expect the tools to do our work for us. The problem with this situation is like that you will always have a sort of cat and mouse game, and one will be always ahead. We can only build tools once we know what the other side does, and then we can try to catch up. So this is a very, very bad situation for us to be in or to rely on. And so I think like we need better tools, but we also actually have to think about methods, how we can approach it. And methods are more valuable than the tool itself. A tool will come and go, but the method might stay. So I think it is really just about like how can, with disinformation investigation, so how do we go about, like how do we start from not knowing anything to actually finding these avatars in these campaigns? And I think these methods are the ones that will carry on to like more investigations and across different tools and across different platforms. And so I think for us journalists, like it is important for us to talk about how we did this kind of research. And so that can be in conferences, or that can be like in articles specifically talking about like these digital methods. And so, for example, as well, like when I was much, much younger, the fact that, for example, the Panama Papers published at some point an article and said like, this is how we did it technically. These were the tools that we did. This was the communication structures that we had. This were like the boundaries or the limits of our tools. That was extremely helpful. I learned a lot from this. And I think like in the data journalism world, or in this like investigative engineering world, it is still quite common to publish not just the output of the research, but also like how you did the research. And I think like this is a very, very important thing for us to continue doing, and I think that will help us a lot, like to learn to deal with this world.
And maybe a short answer
Yes.
on the foundations and how we can conquer AI in journalism.
But exactly from what I heard here, the last sentence, how we were doing it. The journalists or media people in general, to many of in the audience, they look like arrogant know-alls, and they don't find this appealing to them. So if one is more explaining how we are doing it, also when there are mistakes are made, to explain the mistakes and to regret them, and especially in very, very big stories, which is now common with many outlets, to say how did we go about it, how did we learn, what did we do, sometimes to say what we don't know. Yeah? So it's a more open approach that helps people to also to get involved, and this already exists in many news organizations. The readers' letters were something that was regarded as, if it's not the Times of London, but now every news outlet also on the local level is trying to communicate directly on a permanent level with the audience. These are possibilities. The technical side, really, I don't know. I just hope solutions will be found.
And that brings me to your third question, because I think media literacy is a big part also of digital skills and digital literacy. And I think we have to start from here, and maybe Ms. Issep can elaborate on the works UNESCO is doing on education concerning that.
Just one very brief comment. I just wanted to mention, because not everybody might be aware of the fact that UNESCO's General Conference in 2021 adopted a recommendation on the ethics of artificial intelligence. So we kind of have an international instrument here already, and it calls on member states to put in place measures to ensure that artificial intelligence would be used in an ethical way. So we're debating the European Artificial Intelligence Act a lot, also publicly now, and I think it's really important here to see that also from UNESCO there's something that very much focuses on the ethical aspects. And so just one quick quote, because I think there's it's Policy Area 9, Communication and Information, so it's there. In the text, and it says member states should ensure that AI actors respect and promote freedom of expression as well as access to information with regard to automated content generation, moderation and curation. Appropriate frameworks, including regulation, should enable transparency of online communication and information, and so on and so forth. So this is really just to say that we also have standard setting instruments and regulatory framework, international instruments here at that place. But the question really actually was about digital literacy and media literacy.
That was the
right?
third question.
So yes, basically UNESCO with measures such as the media and information literacy curriculum I just mentioned before really tries to make sure that teachers, learners, educators around the world would be equipped for the new challenges ahead. And I think what's really outstanding, if we look at the transformation of the education sector in the last years, is that now with the rise of AI, it's for the second time that especially teachers at schools, but also of course students, are confronted with a completely new situation. We had the pandemic, which changed everything, which enforced or forced teachers to, completely rethink the methods they're using, completely go down new path, adopt new ways. And now, especially with ChatGPT, but I mean there will be other artificial intelligence,
and social media,
and social.
So on.
Of course. So I really think it's crucial for our societies to look there, to listen what young people have to say, to listen what teachers have to say, and to equip them really. And that also, basically, in the end, means we need to give more money to the education sector as well, because otherwise it won't work out.
And also here you have a great and impressive school network in Austria.
Yes, right.
And we can also work with that, which I'm very, very thankful for. Jakob Etzel from our Rotary Club.
Jakob Etzel. I work in the field of enterprise software with a background in mathematics and IT. I would like to build on the last statement of Ms. Park. It was very interesting to look at it from a business transformation perspective. Because I totally buy into your argument. There will always be a market for people seeking news. We need to differentiate it from the market for entertainment, but there will always be people that have dear ones in another part of the world and want to have trusted information. There will always be businessmen that need information to build on their decisions. There will always be those people that seek for knowledge and truth and are ready to pay money for it. So here comes my question. If I am a businessman and I want to invest like 100 million euro into a media outlet that I think will flourish in 10 years under these market circumstances, where should I put my money to? Should I put it to like these very small and specialized media outlets, you know, that are experts in a very particular field? They maybe sell to enterprises that require good information and want to pay news services to their employees so that they work well? Or should I focus on these very large multinational news corporations that can take the efforts of undertaking a very large correspondent network that can fight? Because this is something that can really fight against fake news. I don't buy into building up more technology against technology. It doesn't work. Yeah, you need to have correspondents on the ground and a large multinational news agency that you know has the resources of employing investigative journalism. We heard it can also employ a lot of experts that can counter fake news, not because they have the better technology that makes word analysis, because they have people that think about, can it technically be true? Yeah, that know the literature and understand whether something is fake news or not. Yeah, so where should I put my money to?
Well, good question. I would say wherever you put it, you'll need to be patient capital, because I don't think there are big, quick returns on investments in media. I think what we've seen through the digital transition is that where big media like the New York Times or the Washington Post or the FT, for example, you know, where they've been able to transition to reader revenues, like really, so that, you know, more than half of their revenues are coming from readers and actually moving away from advertising. And that's right. So when they have that big base and that, you know, army of reporters and that the expertise in their newsrooms that so many of our newsrooms used to have, you know, but no longer do. And don't get me wrong, when I talk about, you know, the transition in media and my excitement about new media, I mean, I still mourn, of course, the loss of so many of our, you know, robust, you know, big, you know, newspapers that were such an important part of the cultural, you know, ecosystem of our cities and our countries. But there were also a lot of media that were never very good, right? You know, so, you know, we are
in the sense of quality, maybe
in
the sense of commercial.
In the sense of quality, yeah, that's right. But you know, but actually owning media used to be a license to print money, particularly if you had captured the classifieds market. So I think the big media, if you were just going to invest in the New York Times, the existing big voices, then obviously they're doing very well. But Washington Post is already showing signs that it's on a downturn now. Who knows if they can rescue that? You know, even with all of the big investment from, you know, Jeff Bezos. So they're just a couple of examples. I think more exciting, of course, is to look at how you could support the launch of many new voices. That's what I would like to see if you brought $1 billion to the table. And I would advise you to have many bets on different things, because we still don't know exactly what's going to work and what does the future of journalism look like. I mean, we know it doesn't look like what it used to. You know, and part of that is not just the institutions, it's also the people who are running it and the people who are telling your stories. They look different today, and they have to look different, I think, for them to be successful, because, you know, we're not going to, I don't think too many people were left behind by the media of yesterday, and I think, you know, now they're demanding that their stories are told as well. You know, anyway, I could go on and on about that, but the kind of stories that we tell today are very different to the stories that were told 20 or 30 years ago, and I think that's really important. So my advice would be to have lots of bets, local, regional. You know, try different things. Like, one of the great examples of what one of our members have done is launch a magazine, a continental magazine for Africa on WhatsApp. So they've completely reimagined what journalism can look like. You know, so you've gone from, you know, stories of 700 to 1,500 words, and they've had to boil them down to 300 words, really, to fit on a WhatsApp-sized magazine page. So, but they're doing really well. So, you know, I think experimentation is what will bring you more joy.
So I think the rule is, again, to diversify and to support also the smallest, and to diversify like in other investments.
Yeah.
So thank you again for being here. I could listen for hours to this panel, so thank you exactly, Mrs. Issep, Mr. Stackel, Mrs. Park, and Mr. Buschek, especially in your circumstances. So thank you again for joining us. And thank you for being a great audience. And please stay a little bit and we can mingle outside. Thank you.